I started sandblasting parts and pieces about 40 years ago. I got a kit from Sears, a Craftsman kit. It had a bucket with a tapered bottom in it and an outlet out of the bottom of it. Hook a hose up to the bottom and a siphon sandblaster. Didn't take me too long to discover that the sandblaster would plug up and stuff, and of course it'd empty out, then you'd have to fill it up again. And it turned out I wound up putting a piece of copper tubing in the end of the hose and just stuck it in the bag, and that worked just as well as the bucket. And then in the late 80s, I was down working on my airplane in western Washington, and I needed to sandblast some parts, so I discovered these cheap siphon sandblaster kits. I could get them from a place called Hardware Sales in Bellingham, and they were basically just a siphon gun with a hose and that steel tube, metal tube on the end of it you'd stick down in a bag, and they worked pretty good. But they're not very efficient, and when I started sandblasting more, actually my son was rebuilding a pickup and the frame was all rusty on it. It was just taking a long time. You couldn't get enough pressure on it to use that siphon feed sandblaster efficiently, so I bought a pressure pot, and that worked really good. One of the things we quickly discovered was that, well, two things. One is it's wet up here in the sandblasting doesn't work very good when sand gets wet and stuff. And two, you run through a lot of sand, so you kind of want to recycle it. Again, you need some place to keep the sand under control so you can sweep it up and put it back through the machine again. So we built a little A-frame cover for him to use and use that, but when winter come along, that was just too wet, so I wound up building this shop for him to use to sandblast. And it was just a frame made out of 6x6s and 4x4s I cut off of lumber that was on the property. Eventually I closed it all in and made it into a shop. It soon became apparent that I needed something closed in to do sandblasting work on smaller parts and stuff, and I couldn't afford to buy a sandblasting cabinet. Looking at all the catalogs and stuff, I could see what they had, and I just kind of used pictures out of the catalogs and built this sandblasting cabinet. And this is made out of a 1/4-inch plywood that we got as a crate someplace. The framework is some lumber. Again, I ripped that up out of logs with a chainsaw mill and then ripped it down into 1x1s and 1x2s in places. Use that for the framework and the plywood to close in. I built a V here, going back, a double or a V coming down, and on the inside I made another V, so it has a double V on there for the sand to slide down to the bottom. I got some old gloves that I used, and I got some 6-inch PVC pipe coupling that I cut in half, just glued in here for a collar for the gloves, and I just had working gloves for a while. And then I got some trapping gloves, and they were too tight. I wound up buying gloves from a company, and that was well worth the price for doing that. I designed this around a window that I got that was a window out of an old camper that a friend had, a camper or camp trailer, and I had it on here all sealed up on the top. And I quickly found out that didn't last very long. The windows, just from the bounce back and stuff on there, get eroded pretty fast. Well, I wound up just getting single weight glass cut at the hardware store and changed those out fairly regularly. I made a pass through here on the side for the air to go through, and then I just used a siphon gun, one of the cheap hardware sales Chinese siphon guns in there, and stuck it down in the bottom in the V to pick up the sand, and that worked okay. But the nozzles on those guns wear out pretty fast, and the guns wear out pretty fast. Well, I wound up buying a kit, and it was a good kit. It had ceramic type nozzles in it, and they still wear, but they work a lot better than the cheap Chinese ones. I put a door, and it's just hardware window sash latch. Put a door over here on this side for loading and unloading stuff. But what I wind up doing more than anything is just taking the window out and loading through the window. I had the window originally sealed in there and keep it sealed in, but I have to change it out pretty regularly, and found out that I've got just a piece of ABS sewer pipe fitting back here. I stick the vacuum cleaner, shop vac in there for suction to pull the dust out and stuff. It doesn't take very long for this to get foggy inside. You can't see anything from the dust, so that makes a big difference there. and once I turn that on and hook it up, it pulls down tight and it pulls the window tight and seals it up, so don't have to worry about sealing the window up. Now it's dark in here. Oh, I needed lights in there. The first thing I did was got some little light bulbs they use for vanities, and I stuck those in there. Well, they didn't work very well. I lighted up pretty good and worked pretty nice, but this sand bounces off stuff and it penetrates the light bulb right away and out they go. So I wound up getting fluorescent light bulb and stuck in here and had it hanging in there, and I used that, and that worked a lot better. I found a piece of expanded aluminum that I put in here for the bottom to hold the parts. Well, a lot of the parts I do are real small, so I put a piece of hardware cloth on top of that, and that lets the sand drop down through and keeps parts from falling through. Originally I had a piece of wood going across here in the middle to help support the center of this when I get heavy pieces in here and stuff, and that got ate out pretty fast, so I've got a piece of angled aluminum that I've got notched out on the ends and stuck over these 1x1 pieces here on the back side. And I also took some latex caulking and went around all the seams and stuff to seal those up so the dust doesn't come out of those. And I just used a Sears shop vac, and I've had one that I had for years that I used on this, and eventually motor went out on it. The dust is pretty hard on them. We got one of the Gore-Tex clean stream filters on it, which makes a big difference, but still go out pretty soon. And I bought another used one that's already half wore out that I've been using lately, and it works okay. Now this is the bottom of the sandblasting cabinet. Ran out of wood out of the original cabinet and wound up finding some 1/4-inch OSB someplace in another cabinet. This is the slope, and it slopes back from the backside a little bit, not as much. It's steeper on the backside. For draining it here, I just made a little gate valve here out of a piece of 1/4-inch plywood with a little handle stuck on it, and I put some rabbets in some, I think those are 1x2s or something. It just slides up and down there like that, and then a hole here in the bottom, and that lets me drain my sand out of there when I need to change it. And right here is the tube for the pickup tube for the siphon gun, is right there in that bottom corner, and I've got it glued down so that it doesn't move around. I've used glass beads in here, and that worked fine. I generally use this green sand, which is called green diamond, and that works good on almost everything. I tried some of the baking soda. That was a mistake. That stuff is so fine that it makes such a fine dust. It plugs up the vacuum cleaner real fast, and you can't get any dust out of there, and it cakes up, and it's just a mess in a closed chamber. Probably works okay out in the open for a open pressure blaster, but it doesn't work in a closed container very well. A little sandblaster has worked pretty good for me over the years, but I do a lot of bigger parts. I like to want to do a lot of bigger parts, and I don't always want to get out the pressure blaster. It's nice to have a closed-in system to do those on. So I bought a new sandblaster, and we're going to get it moved in here now. But to get it moved in here, it's a lot bigger than this one. Well, I have to take this one out of here. That little sandblasting cabinet that I made worked real well for a long time. It was a whole lot better than some of the other things that I've had. I cleaned up a lot of parts in it. Parts for the airplane and for trucks and equipment, boats and chainsaws, all kinds of things like that. But there were some things that was just too small to fit in there. I always wanted something a little bigger and better. Kept looking for a new sandblasting cabinet, and I finally took the plunge and ordered this one. It's a company back in the Midwest, the BadBoy. They're advertising on eBay. So I went ahead and ordered this one from them. They say this one's a lot bigger than the little wooden one that I had, so I was hoping it'd work better. And it does work pretty good, but it's pretty big. I've had it outside in the outer portion of the shop for a little over a year now since I got it. We just spent the day today cleaning up and moving the old one out, the homemade one out of here, and bringing this one in. I don't know how much this thing weighs, but it's pretty heavy. Left it on the pallet and put some steel bars underneath it, pipe underneath it, and rolled it in here and got it in position. I'd measured it and knew the height of it would fit underneath that cabinet that's above it. I knew it'd fit underneath there, but I also knew it was going to take up most of the room in there. And I've got this big Harbor Freight US General tool chest in here, and it just barely fit in there before, but I didn't think I was going to get it in here with that blasting cabinet in here. But we pulled that thing in here and got it off the pallet. I took my wood stove and spun it around a little bit to the side there to get a little different angle on it so we could move that cabinet farther that direction. And I've got it in between two outlets, so I've got a handy outlet over here on this side to plug the cabinet into, and I still got my outlet on the other side for the fan for the stove and stuff. I had to redo the plumbing a little bit for the air. I changed it around a little bit, got my toolbox back in there, and everything's back just the way it was. So this will be nice to work on this in here. Doing it out there in the outer portion of the shop, the lens fogged up all the time, so now I can get it in here with the heater going and get the air dried out a little bit. Anyway, this has its own dust collection system on there. It's got one of those Chinese Harbor Freight whatever little dust collectors mounted to the side with a bag on it for pulling the dust out of the cabinet, and that works really good. Got on-off switch here. You put it on one way for the handgun and one here for the center gun. I don't really like that too well because you've got to turn it on from outside, then go inside while the gun is squirting out abrasive and stuff in there. You see, you've got to have the gun on while you turn it on, get the gun and the gun spraying abrasive while you're fooling around trying to get your hands in the gloves and stuff like that and get in there to look. But it is a two-way switch, and we've got two ways to get in here. I've got a big door on the side, which I'm going to be limited in because I've got the stove over there on that side, but I don't use that much anyway. I wind up using this more and putting stuff in and out through this opening. It's got a nice big gun on it. Again, there's no trigger or anything on the gun because the valve for it is out here on the outside. And then this is an option. It's a center mounted fixed gun, and they put in extra on that, and that's the second way on the valve to open that up. You can get that thing spraying and hold parts underneath it and move it around instead of holding the gun and spraying on things. And it will pivot and get over here out of the way, but they've got this hose here. They should have had the hose run outside and out and come in up on the top someplace instead of like that, because the hose does take up a lot of valuable space on the inside there. And then there is a little blow-off gun in here. I'm not sure how valuable that is, but or how long that'll work. Got a nice punched steel bottom on there that keeps the parts from going through, except real small parts, and it allows the sand to go through. And they had it painted on the inside, but you'd think they painted it with some kind of rubberized paint or something, because the first time you use it, it just blasts the paint off there just from the bounce off and stuff of the parts. On the window, it's got a nice big glass window in here, and then they sent some plastic sheets with double-sided tape on it that you could tape on the inside. But those, I don't like those very well. They fogged up right away. That abrasive just knocks those off right away, and the visibility drops down real quick. They get air in between them, and you get fogged up in between, and they get sand in between them and stuff like that. What I did is I measured this off and then went ahead and went to the hardware store, had them cut me a piece of single weight glass, and then put some double-sided sticky tape on that and stuck onto the inside of the main glass. And that lasts a lot longer than what the plastic does. It still gets abraded and still gets foggy, so it's hard to see through. And it doesn't cost much. It's only $4 or $5 for a sheet of glass to fit in there, and it lasts quite a while. The one thing, all in all, I'm pretty happy with the machine. The one thing that I was kind of disappointed with was that they painted over the raw metal. They didn't sandblast the metal, they didn't clean it up, they painted over the raw metal, and they've already got rust blisters coming through the paint on it. And it hasn't been out in the weather, it's been undercover ever since I've got it, and that's just from poor quality control on the paint. The other thing that is kind of a pain is the gloves are too short to reach anywhere inside the container here, inside the cabinet. And the gloves will only reach a little ways in there, so when you get multiple parts in there and they get knocked over and back over here into this corner and stuff, you can't reach them with your gloves on. You got to stop everything, get out, shut it off, wait for the air to clean out all the abrasive and the dust in it, and then open it up and reach in there and get your part. Gloves another 6 inches longer would have been a big help on that. But otherwise, it's a pretty good machine.